Hello, everyone from Santo Domingo. Hello, everyone from Santo Domingo, and good morning to some of you, and good evening to others in different parts of the world. My name is Ribotta. I am part of the UN Women Capacity Development Team, and I'm very, very glad to welcome you today to this online session of the Gender Focal Points Agents of Organizational Change, which is a blended training that we're doing conjointly with the ITC-ILO. And as you know, the session today is about the UNSWAP, which is the system-wide action plan on gender equality and the empowerment of women, and also about the UN Country Team SWAP Scorecard. So quickly, before we move on to the content, we have some logistic considerations. So first, it is important for you to know that you can type comments and questions at any time during this webinar session. You will have to do that through a chat box that you have at the right side of your screens in the GoToWebinar control menu. It looks like the one that you have on the slide right now. So please note that all these questions will be compiled and will be addressed by the panelists at the end of the session, but you can do it at any time during the presentation. It's very important for us to have your feedback and to have your comments and questions. So also please note that this session is being recorded and it will be made available through the Training Center YouTube channel that you have it right on your screens. For easy access, you can also type it on any search engine that you have, Training Center YouTube, but also it will be made available through the ITC-ILO e-learning campus, your e-learning campus course space. So don't worry about that, you will have the recording. I am very, very pleased to present today's panelists, which are Priya Álvarez and Michele Ribotta from the UN System Coordination Division. Priya is a women's rights professional with over 15 years of practical experience in policy development and legislation, evaluation, and strategic planning. She works as evaluation specialist and is currently supporting the UN System Coordination Division at UN Women. Prior to that, she served as the gender budgeting specialist for the European Commission and worked as an independent evaluator and gender equality expert for a range of non-profit organizations, national governments, bilateral agencies, and UN entities. Michele joined UN Women in 2012, where he has been working as advisor to the director of the UN System Coordination Division. In his capacity, he has supported UN Women efforts to mainstream gender in the work of the UN development system at a global, regional, and country level, working with key UN interagency coordination mechanisms in the context of the UN reform and the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to joining UN Women, Michele led the UN Coherence Learning Team at the UN System Staff College, providing also training and facilitation services to UN country teams and leadership and strategic planning. So I thank you both, Michele and Priya, for being here with us today. And now, without further ado, I leave the floor to Priya, who will walk us through the UNSWAP. Priya, you can start whenever you want the presentation. I'm unmuting you right now. I'm sorry, Priya, can you hear us?
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Leticia. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, very well now. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. I was commenting to Leticia and the Training Center team this morning before this webinar that this is a very important year for UN Women and in general for UN coordination for many reasons. One important reason is the UN reform, the different reform strands that are being implemented right now as we speak during this year and next year. But also internally for us, it's an important year because we are transitioning from our first cycle of implementation of the UNSWAP, what we call UNSWAP 1.0, to the UNSWAP 2.0 that will be reported at the beginning of 2019 through the Secretary General report to the ECOSOC on gender mainstreaming in the UN system. So let me begin. For those of you that are not so familiar with UN Women and its mandate, saying that The UN Women, when it was created in 2010, in addition to a normative mandate and operational mandate, it was given a very specific and important mandate, which is coordinating, leading and promoting accountability of the UN system on gender equality and empowerment of women. UN Women was a product of actually another UN reform for coherence, and this was the first time that all the entities that were part of UN Women were given this mandate. So I will start explaining how UN Women has operationalized this mandate. So please, next slide. So as you can see in the coordination division, we have like 4 lines of action, and these are related to accountability for gender mainstreaming at corporate level for UN entities. Second, we have accountability as well for gender mainstreaming, but at UN country team level, which is what Michele, my colleague, is going to present right after my presentation. Then there is another line of work, which is gender mainstreaming into substantive thematic areas, being that biodiversity, violence against women, artificial intelligence, empowerment, economic empowerment, political participation, whatever thematic substantive area. And finally, another very, very important strand at UN Women in the UN Coordination Division is parity. Which is equal representation of women, and is very much led now by the Secretary General strategy on gender parity in the UN system. Next. So coming into the UNSWAP framework in particular, a bit of history, a bit of background is that this framework was endorsed by the CEB in 2012, which is the maximum coordination body of the UN. And it was endorsed for 3 aspects, 3 dimensions. One was the UNSWAP, understanding by that a system of accountability based on functions, functional areas that any entity has, meaning human resources, capacity building, audit, evaluation, strategic planning, communications, etc. The second strand of work is the UNCT-SWAP, meaning accountability for gender equality at country team level. The accountability of what the UN does at the field level for those entities that have field offices. And finally, the third aspect was a focus on results. So not only on functions, not only on inputs, not only on institutional areas, but also on the results for women and girls and men and boys at country and normative levels. Next. So the UNSWAP was created in response to that, and at the beginning in 2012, it started by implementing a set of indicators, specifically 15 indicators that were related to functions in any bureaucracy, in any UN entity. However, as I said at the beginning, we are in transition to the UNSWAP 2.0 because the UNSWAP 2.0 has included results, a focus on results, particularly SDG gender-related results. And the focus is both at corporate level, but also at country level. In the first iteration of the UNSWAP, the UNSWAP 1.0 that happened between 2012 and 2017, we achieved a very important result, which is getting 66 entities of the UN system reporting annually against these 15 indicators. 66 UN entities is almost all the universe of UN entities, is 94% of the UN universe. And for the very first time, the UNSWAP is an accountability tool for gender mainstreaming for the whole UN system that not only keeps a focus on accountability, but also on learning and increasing capacity to implement gender mainstreaming. Next, please. So as I said, in 2017, the year that was reported this year, in 2018, Secretary General report to the ECOSOC, 66 entities were reporting against the UNSWAP. And as you can see, this has been increasingly growing from 2012, where we started with a modest or more limited baseline of 55 entities, and it has reached, as I said, 94% of the whole universe of UN entities, which cover around 99% of the budget of the United Nations. Next. So if we look at what happened with the indicators, the 15 indicators, we can see how we started with a relatively low level baseline in 2012 with just 31% of entities meeting or exceeding the indicators of the UNSWAP, and it has also steadily growing until this 65% in 2017. This is still far from 100%. So we consider that we needed to increase attention to some indicators that were not performing so well. And now I'm going to present to you a bit of more detail into those indicators and also into how progress has happened in these past 6 years. Next, please. So as you can see in this slide, well, first of all, I have to say for those of you that are not so familiar with the UNSWAP, that for each indicator, entities have to report whether they are missing requirements, approaching requirements, meeting requirements, or exceeding requirements. It's a sliding scale, increasingly more difficult to meet. As you can see in the graph, we are started with quite a low level of entities exceeding or meeting requirements in 2012. And you can see how increasingly there is much less amount of entities approaching or missing or considering that some indicators are not applicable, which is the left area of every graph for every year. And however, what is increasing is the rating of meeting and exceeding indicators. We can see that in the last 2 years, 2016 and 2017, more or less we got the same amount. Normally we consider both meeting requirements and exceeding requirements together. And we got like 64% and 65% in 2016 and 2017 of meeting and exceeding. But if we examine more carefully the progression, what we see is that we are getting more entities exceeding requirements that actually jumped from 19% in 2016 to 24% in 2017. So this has been a very successful story. As I said before, it doesn't mean that we got 100%, perhaps 100% is also too much of a target, but we are very happy. We consider that the UNSWAP is a successful story into steadily progressing in the implementation of a broad set of indicators showing how to implement gender mainstreaming across a range of functions in a UN entity. Next, please. Here is just a selection of those indicators that have been progressing more in these past 6 years. So I will show you the full list of indicators later because I want to show you what has happened from UNSWAP 1.0 to UNSWAP 2.0. But here you can see already what happened to 6 indicators. So those that have changed more, that have grown more, are a policy indicator, which is the indicator number 1 for the UNSWAP 1.0, the monitoring and reporting, the audit indicator that increased in more than 79 percentage points, program review, capacity development, and knowledge and communications. So this has been the indicators that were overall growing more strongly in the whole array of 15 indicators. Next, please. In this slide, you can see all indicators, and they are organized according to the results in the year 2017. So you can see how the first indicator, which is the indicator that is getting the best performance, is gender responsive auditing. Gender responsive auditing started in 2012 with a very, very low rate. If you look at the value in 2012, you can see that it was 13 percentage points of ratings meeting or exceeding the indicators for gender responsive auditing. And in 2017 is 92%. So it's really a very excellent example of increasing performance and meeting the requirements set in the UNSWAP 1.0. The same happened with coherence. That is also a very an indicator with a very good performance, although the increment has not been so huge because it started much higher in 2012 with 77%, and now the level is 86%. Some other indicators that are performing well in the UNSWAP 1.0 have been monitoring and reporting, gender responsive performance management, policy and plan, and this has been a very important indicator. As you can see, in 2012 there were 40% of entities having a gender responsive policy, and now is 82%. And that is important because having a gender responsive policy or a policy for gender equality in an entity has been identified as a major lever to get also better performance across all other indicators. And finally, another important indicator with a very good rating is knowledge generation and communication. It was also one of those indicators that grew exponentially in these years, starting by a level of 34% and reaching now a level of 82%. It is also highlighted the indicator on evaluation. You can see how the indicator on evaluation was normally a low performer, historically one of the weakest performance areas, but it achieved a very significant gain of 14 percentage points in the last year, reaching now a 72% of entities meeting or exceeding requirements. I have to say at this point that this has been very important because it highlights one of the ways of implementation for the UNSWAP, which is counting on what we call business owners for managing the indicator. In the case of the evaluation indicator, the business owners are the UNEC, the UN Evaluation Group. They are in charge of issuing guidance, actually scoring this indicator and checking what is the level for each entity, keeping quality assurance, and making sure that there is all support that is needed to implement this indicator better. The same happens for other indicators. For instance, for audit, we have UNRIAS, which is also the audit group for the UN system. And we have also some other networks like finance and budget for the financial indicators, or a strategic planning network for strategic plans. In the last part of the table, in the bottom, you can see the indicators that are performing not so well. And these are resource tracking, capacity assessment, resource allocation, and gender architecture and parity. These indicators have also progressed, but not so well as others. And we consider that we have to still increase our support to make sure that the UN system is progressing adequately as well for these indicators. Next, please. So we have now the UNSWAP 2.0, which is an updated framework. It's being implemented this year, and it is based on very important lessons learned from the UNSWAP 1.0. And also it has been consulted heavily across the system and piloted in a number of entities to make sure that is the right level of accountability framework for the UN system right now. Next, please. So you have here the indicators in this updated UNSWAP framework. And we have grouped the indicators in two major categories. One is gender-related SDG results, because as I said at the very beginning, The main change in this UNSWAP 2.0 framework is a focus on results. And then we have the other indicators that are more institutional indicators for supporting the achievement of results. So the indicators that have changed with respect of UNSWAP 1.0 are the number 1, 2, and 3, that are the indicators related to results. We have introduced also a new indicator, which is indicator 7, performance indicator 7 on leadership. And also, we used to have gender architecture and parity together in one indicator, and we have made now 2 different indicators, which are indicator 11 and 12. So we have a specific indicator for parity that is called equal representation of women. Next, please. Next, please. Next slide. Oh, we can pass this slide because it's just a graph. Just in the interest of time. So here is a bit more explanation about the UNSWAP 2.0 framework. And what you can see here is a bit more detail on the indicators. As I said, the first 2 categories, A and B, are related to results. And here we have strategic planning, gender-related SDG results, reporting on gender-related SDG results, and a 3rd category of indicators, which is programmatic gender-related SDG results. And this is for those entities who have some gender-related results that are not captured in the strategic plan. Then we have in the section on oversight, evaluation and audit. Then we have accountability, which is policy plan leadership and gender-responsive performance management. In human and financial resources, we have resource tracking and resource allocation for financial resources. This is particularly resource tracking, what we call gender markers. Then we have gender architecture and equal representation of women and organizational culture. On capacity, we have both capacity assessment and development, and knowledge, communication, and coherence is about knowledge and communication and coherence as 2 separate indicators. Next, please. So this is just a picture from our latest UNSWAP meeting in Geneva this year. And this is some colleagues from different entities that were just playing a little bit, trying to have a picture saying UNSWAP. And I just wanted to show you this picture and also the next one, please, which is a bit more sort of fun. And thank you very much for your interest in the UNSWAP, and I'm ready for any question that you want to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, for a wonderful presentation. I just want to remind all of the participants that we can receive your questions throughout the presentation. So please make sure to type them on the chat box, and we will have the time to ask some of those questions to Priya at the end. So now we're going to move on to the UNCT-SWAP presentation with Michele Ribotta. Michele, can you please unmute yourself and feel free to start?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you very much for this invitation. I will just take a few more minutes to follow on Priya's presentation, just to give you a little bit of information about the country level equivalent of the UNSWAP that Priya has presented. As we understand, participants in this workshop are kind of a mix of colleagues who serve in HQ's departments, as well as colleagues who are actually deployed within country offices, serving country level work of the UN system. So fundamentally, Priya has mentioned the reform at the beginning of the presentation. Indeed, the development of the new UNCT-SWAP Gender Reported Scorecard that was launched a few months ago after a couple of years of intense review and redevelopment work really tries to capture some of the key elements of a changing UN system at the country level, which is, as you know, currently being repositioned with the new Secretary General, and which really builds on a kind of a new generation of country teams, of a more empowered resident coordinators and draws on the centrality of the UNDAFs, the UN Development Assistance Frameworks, as the central programming and planning instruments that the UN at the country level uses to support countries in their efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, there has been a lot of progress so far since the initial scorecard was sort of at the country level was implemented almost 10 years ago. Country teams have made progress in gender mainstreaming, which we can sort of assess through a number of indicators that are currently monitored. But they were, in the review of the previous generation of scorecard, we have found some limitations in the tool and methodology, which we have worked hard to address. These limitations mainly had to do with a low kind of a low level of use or take up by country teams of the scorecard instrument, probably caused by the fact that the methodology itself was not really promoting a lot of ownership of the country teams themselves, but also the methodology and the rating systems were not really aligned with the corporate SWAP, which actually came in after the country level scorecard was developed. So we had a number of issues that we worked hard on to fix. If I can have next slide. So fundamentally, I mean, Priya has already spoken about what the sort of these accountability SWAP mechanisms are. Fundamentally, an accountability framework to help country teams improve their planning, their coordination and programming, and ultimately the delivery of results for gender equality and empowerment of women. It's a tool through which country teams assesses its performance on gender mainstreaming across a number of globally established requirements. And one of the key differences from the corporate SWAP that Priya spoke about is that this is a tool which is actually used at the country level by the UN country team, looking at interagency and across agencies processes and tools, and so does not it is not sort of taken up at the level and reported on at the level of the single entity within the country team, but really looking at the UN country team as a whole. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of history which you can have a look at. Some of this was also mentioned by Priya. We had the Chief Executives Board policy 12 years ago, which really sets the framework for the work of the UN system on gender mainstreaming at all levels, global, regional, and country level, and on the basis of which accountability tools were developed. Now, in terms of what's new about the new sort of generation of UNCT-SWAP scorecards is that we have a fully reviewed methodology which is in line with the corporate SWAP, which really pushes more ownership by country teams through a participatory self-assessment. And also we have a fully revised technical guidance that was developed and endorsed by the UNDG as a system-wide tool that belongs to the entire system and commits the entire system that provides operations at the country level. Another new element of the new UNCT-SWAP scorecard is that there is an addition to a sort of focus on results, similarly to what has happened in the 2.0 of the SWAP, whereby we basically asking country teams the questions on okay, not only we want to see how are you doing, how are you mainstreaming and addressing gender through your planning frameworks, but also we want to ask you the question about what has been the progress that you are able to demonstrate in delivering results for women and girls. There is also another, of course, all of the performance indicators that we will quickly have a look at in a minute have been also strengthened to reflect the progress that over the years has been made by UN country teams, and because the ultimate idea of these tools is to really progressively over the years raise the bar of performance by country teams. and take stock of the progress that they can make. There is also one of the new features of the new tool is that for the first time we're also taking the opportunity of this exercise of the self-assessment to really reach out to UN staff working at the country level. So there's a whole survey which is built in one of the performance indicators on organizational culture within the country team that really asks the questions directly to UN staff, to colleagues working in the UN system and within the given country to get an element of feedback on the extent to which they feel gender equality and women empowerment is really a principle which is upheld, promoted, and upheld as part of the organizational culture of the system in that country. So there are a number of new features that we hope will really push country teams to sort of consider this tool as a very useful product that they have to help them improve their work on gender mainstreaming. Next slide. So fundamentally, I've spoken about that. It's the way it works is through a participatory self-assessment that is conducted by an interagency team. Now, one of the other new novelties of the tool is that the methodology has been revised to make sure that country teams who cannot afford or who do not want to have an external consultant supporting the process actually have a step-by-step guidance so that they can actually undertake the exercise on their own. And also we have simplified to the extent possible the exercise so that it can really be undertaken without significant external support. There is of course a help desk that is being managed by globally by UN Women to sort of communicate with country teams that undertake the exercise and help them through the process. And we're also organizing a series of capacity development workshops for those country teams that are planning to undertake the assessment, the first of which will take place in a few weeks from now. The tool does use 15 standardized indicators within 7 dimensions. The exercise and the assessment is done looking at actual evidence which is available to country teams through a number of documents that were produced by country teams themselves. The other important aspect of this exercise is that it culminates into an action planning whereby the key findings and the key challenges that the exercise highlights are basically then taken into and discussed into a kind of an action plan document, which very simply kind of highlights the key follow-up actions that the country team engages to work on over the coming months and years until the new exercise is undertaken. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the actual dimension areas and the performance indicators, these are highly aligned with those that have been presented to you by Priya through the corporate swap. They are not entirely the same because, of course, given the different context in which this exercise takes place, we have looked for equivalencies across the various performance areas. But anyway, we are basically looking at planning, programming, partnership, leadership and organizational culture, the capacities of country teams and the way they organize their work, the financial resources that are allocated for gender mainstreaming, as well as the results. If we go to the next slide, you would see that out of the 15 indicators, or half of them, or more than half of them, 8 out of 15 are directly related and draw on the UN Development Assistance Framework as the central planning sort of process and instrument that all agencies at the country level use under the leadership of the resident coordinator. So that's extremely important. And so here in the first 2 areas, you see how through the assessment we are looking at the extent to which gender mainstreaming is addressed through the common country analysis, in the results matrices of the UNDAF, through the indicators, whether or not country teams engage in joint programs and how joint programs that are being implemented by country teams address gender-specific results, etc., etc. In the next slide, we would see the other 2 performance areas where essentially country teams would be able to self-assess the extent to which they kind of partner with national institutions as well as civil society in the on the gender agenda, and how the UNCT leadership is really committed in championing gender equality, drawing on the kind of UN leadership framework that was recently endorsed by the CEB, the Chief Executives Board. I spoke to you about the survey and the organizational culture being conducive to gender equality, and also gender parity in staffing is like the SWAP is an indicator which is being looked at. Next slide. So in the last three-dimension areas, they look at the capacities and how gender and how country teams are organizing the work through the various interagency mechanisms to make sure that gender is highly on the agenda and across the various mechanisms and results groups, and that there is adequate understanding and capacities across agency staff to pick up this work. The area 6 is all about doing a better job in accounting for the amount of resources that go into the UNDAF budgetary frameworks that are specifically dedicated to promote gender equality and empowerment of women. And the seventh area looks at the actual changes that the country teams are able to demonstrate as a result of their commitments to gender mainstreaming. Next slide. So I think it's, you know, in terms of the key outputs of the exercise, you basically have a kind of the assessment that culminates into a report, which can be, for which the technical guidance provides a number of options, also based on which country teams can benefit from a consultant support or not. It culminates in an action plan with timelines, resources, and responsibilities for the various actions that have been agreed by the country team. And it also, each and every country exercise feeds into a global reporting that UN Women consolidates on behalf of the Secretary General every year to the ECOSOC on the extent to which the UN system mainstream genders across its policies and programs, and similarly to what happens with the corporate SWAP. So this exercise provides the country level kind of aspect of progress over the years achieved by the system. Priya, I showed you a number of graphs illustrating and visualizing some of the progress. This was also one of the limitations of the previous generations of the country level tools, and now we're also working to develop similar reporting platforms through which country teams will be able to sort of to illustrate their work and their progress, and we will be able at the global level to kind of consolidate and aggregate so that we can illustrate what the global trends are across country teams and across the various performance areas and indicators. I would stop here. We would of course love to leave a little bit of time to if there are any questions for clarifications or any comments or experience sharing based on experiences of colleagues. So I will give it back to you, Leticia.
Thank you so much, Michele. It was a wonderful overview. We do have some questions from the audience coming up. I just want to quickly remind to all that there is still some time to make the questions reach us. So please make sure to type them. I encourage you because it's a great opportunity that we have to ask Michele and Priya questions today. So we have the first question on screen right now. And it says, there are so many tools, very excellent tools on facilitating gender equality. Why then are we still very much lagging behind making real impact? Could this be due to the fact that addressing gender equality is like trying to attack a moving or evolving target with new themes and dynamics impacting on gender equality? And this is from Inviolata. So I don't know, Michele, if you would like to start addressing this question. And
sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very good point, and one of the limitations of the tools that we had so far was that these were tools that were mainly looking at progress on the institutional setup of the UN organizations. in terms of how well prepared we are to address these issues and these challenges that women and girls face worldwide. Now we are trying to precisely address the question that Violata is asking. I think that she's right to say there is an element of moving target. I think there is also an element of the fact that gender equality, because it has to do with fundamentally understanding and addressing structural causes of discrimination in societies, it is obviously not a technical exercise. So the technical tools are very helpful in providing methodologies and entry points to understand issues, but at the end of the day, we are speaking about an eminently political issue with a variety of political complexities that need to be understood and addressed in a way that is successful and then that can really promote transformative change for women and girls. So I think that's also why there's an element of moving target, but there's an element of it is constantly a politically charged conversations that our leaders on the ground need to have with partners in countries, and sometimes also within our own UN teams. We don't necessarily have the needed level of sensitivities over these issues. So there is still progress that needs to be happen on various fronts. I mean, that would be my contribution.
Thank you, Michele. Priya, would you like to add something to this reply? Would you have something else to say? Feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you have any comment, Priya. So I take the opportunity to remind participants again that there's still a bit of more time to make your question reach us.
Okay.
Priya, are you there? Do you want to add something to?
I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you.
Thank
well, I think Michele has provided an excellent response. I will elaborate on that, but I think gender equality is highly political, as he said, and that means that I think many things can really be changed almost overnight or very easily if there is political will, and that means if there is enough resource base to attack the problem, to provide responses. We can see that in the example of what's happening right now with the Me Too movement, with the gender parity, the Secretary General gender parity strategy. So now there are more awareness, tools, and political will to address some of these inequalities, and then things are moving and are happening. And still, technically, it's not always very easy, including on parity. You have contracts, attrition, a number of reasons why it cannot be made overnight, but for sure, there is now a much better climate to hire women, which will provide a much better parity landscape in the UN system. That's as an example. But in general, I think that gender equality is not well funded. It's a very huge mandate. Sometimes it's treated as if it is just a cross-cutting issue affecting a minority, but the women is not a minority, and gender equality is about women and men, and it should be really much more prominent in the agenda, not so much in terms of words and speeches, which is also important, but much more in terms of funding and resources devoted to gender equality across the system.
Thank you, Priya. We have another question by Kamfa. It says, can the performance of gender architecture and parity measures be approved as quickly as we saw for the gender audit? So I believe Kamfa is referring to the slide that you were showing, Priya, about how some of the indicators reflected a very wide growth. So I don't know if you want to address this question first.
Yeah, Kamfa, thank you. I think it's one of the things I would say, in addition to what I said before, is that having a good accountability mechanism and a good accountability framework also makes a difference, because sometimes some entities or some governments or some whatever institutions take a set of measures and not others, and in a way some actions undermine the other actions. So you may have a wonderful strategic plan, but that is not properly monitored, in its implementation, and then it may deemed actually ineffectual. And the same happens with parity. So parity is not as easy in the sense that, as I said, there are contractual obligations, and you cannot just replace men by women or something like that. So you have to incrementally have a plan to hire more women, to have better recruitment systems that actually reach out to women and men equally, make sure that there is no discrimination in your systems, and also set up some temporary measures that can counteract the existing inequality. But I think we will see results, and we are seeing already results. I think it's a very promising sector. And our colleagues in the coordination division working on parity, they are also working on some aspects that are not so clear when we talk about parity, which is not just recruiting personnel, but it's also these other policies, or what they call enabling environment, that make possible for women to stay in an office when they go through maternity, or when there are family problems, because as we know, the gender roles normally force women to address the care responsibilities in a family. So making sure that the systems are in place for women to remain also in the jobs, and to have the right promotions and the right career progression. So I think we will see results come. I am very positive about that, but not as quick as we want, and not as quick as in the gender audit case, because we have also some limitations in terms of contracts and hiring and appointments, and some political appointments as well, and not everything can be done according to the will of one person or two people in the system. But in general, yes, I am positive. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Priya, for the reply. We do hope to see that advancing. And I don't know, Michele, if you have anything to add to this question, to this
Very
answer?
quickly, of course, providing the country level perspective, I would certainly say that the answer to that question is yes. And I think that we are really seeing some signs. I mean, for example, we know that interagency groups within country teams that focus on gender, whether speaking about gender team groups or UNDAF resource groups on SDG 5 or the like, are the highest number, represent the highest number of interagency coordination mechanisms within country teams. So this means that there is a lot of focus and a lot of ongoing efforts of country teams to organize their joint work in a structured way around issues of gender equality. We issued also, to support this evolution and this constant progress, we issued recently a guidance also on optimizing the functioning of gender team groups as again, not as UN Women, but as UN Sustainable Development Group, which is basically bringing all the systems together, which provides kind of knowledge products so that people can constantly improve the way they organize the work at the country level. On the parity side, this year, for the first time, resident coordinators, the gender parity in resident coordinators' appointment have been established for the first time in the history of the resident coordinator system, with a 50-50 kind of distribution between men and women. Now, the challenge of all of these achievements is to be able to sustain them over time. We're always at risk of regression. So obviously, this is something that these tools that we have help us and help country teams, keeping constantly an eye on those questions, and making sure that the gains that have been achieved can be kind of protected, if I may say so. Over.
Thank you, Michele. So we have another question from Inviolata, and it says, is the transition from MDGs to SDGs going to result in a huge overhaul of the tools? Which ones will have to be adapted, and which new tools will have to be introduced? Michele, I don't know if you want to address this in the context of the current transitions that we're seeing in the system.
Yeah, I would say that it is already resulting in a major revision and fundamental kind of shift to a new generation of support tools for UN country teams, and we have seen this in many areas. So I have mentioned the UNDAP. The UNDAP has already gone through a whole process of revision. We have the latest version of the guidance was dated 2017. And as we speak, there is yet a new generation of UNDAs that are being developed. The underlying premise being that the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General still do not perceive that the way UNDAs are developed and implemented by country teams fully address the integrated nature of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is one of the kind of major sort of strengths with respect to the previous generation of MDGs. So that's an example. We are having a number of tools that are being developed to really help the system have an integrated approach to help countries in addressing the SDGs. So I would certainly say yes, this is happening, and it will probably continue to happen. As far as we are concerned, we're also, I think one of the challenges that the system is having is nowadays is that there is a risk of proliferation of, especially of knowledge, policy, guidance, and tools that is basically landing on UN country teams and the Office of Resident Coordinators. So there has to be an effort which is made here, to secure consistency and alignment of the various tools. And this is one of the things that we're looking at. For example, in doing the new generation of UNDAs, we want to make sure that the guidance that will go with it will be fully taking into consideration the gains that we have been able to produce through the revision of the UNCT-SWAP Scorecard, because that UNCT-SWAP Scorecard gives the minimum agreed upon performance requirements that the system has been able to identify, which are, by the way, very important highlight, which are directly emanating from mandates of member states through intergovernmental resolutions or a previous agreed upon policy at the highest level of the UN system.
Thanks, Michele. Would you like to add something to this, Priya?
Well, really, I think Michele has did very wonderfully, and he has a very vast knowledge, not only of the country level, but of all the reforms and the different work that is happening at many levels to make sure that the UN is up to speed with SDGs. I would say, as comparing to the MDGs, that the main difference with MDGs is not only that there is a stronger focus on gender equality, like the SDG 5 is much stronger than MDG 3, but I would say also that unlike the MDGs, there is a lot more gender mainstreaming, meaning there are a number of gender-related SDG results across the other SDGs, not only SDG 5. And that means, of course, that we need perhaps, I wouldn't say new tools, but adapted tools to make sure that in all these other areas where gender equality is a cross-cutting issue or a mainstreaming need, this can happen easily, because it is also true that people may not be gender experts, they may not need to be, and therefore they need support in the form of tools or technical assistance or training to make sure that what they do is really transformative and not just ticking the box or paying lip service, that they use any SDG related program as a vehicle to provide gender equality as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. We have another comment from Kampa, and it says, from my experience as a gender focal point, I find that men are more supportive of gender equality and mainstreaming in the workplace. Women often pull each other down or put each other down and are less likely to embrace gender mainstreaming. Have you encountered such issue at the UN? Would you like to begin addressing this comment and question, Priya?
Yeah, well, I think there are so many stereotypes and so many different people and different circumstances. It all depends really on the type of organizational culture. I think when there is a good system and a good corporate attention to gender equality, it's much more difficult to be discriminatory. I think we as human beings react to the context, and we react, we go to our workplaces and we respond to how the organizations where we work are structured. And we can see it now in the sexual harassment issues that are happening in the world. So if you are in a place where all is accepted and acceptable and nobody pays ever any consequence, you learn that. And then I think as a man or as a woman, you react accordingly. As a woman, you may react by never reporting anything because you think that you will not be heard. And by a man, you react like taking for granted that this is unacceptable behavior. And the same happens with gender equality in general. I think there are many men that are actually very supportive of the gender equality agenda, for whatever the reason, because they really believe in gender equality, because they have daughters or wives that are actually feminist, or they can see through those experiences of the female members of their families or circles what discrimination means and how unfair it is, because they have reflected on that, because they are champions and supporters. Some other men are not at all responsive, and in many cases gender equality and particularly gender parity may be undermining their possibilities of getting a promotion, and therefore they don't receive any gender parity agenda very happily. And for women, I think equally in some cases, in general, I think women are more aware of discrimination, but not always. And there are many women who are successful who like to think that is all their merits, is not because many women before them have been fighting to get better workplaces and to make it possible for future generations. So I wouldn't generalize, because I think gender equality is a lot about the stereotypes, and it's very easy to say that women are not good to other women, and for sure we need also to address that when that happens. But I am actually very curious to understand better the experience of Kamfa, because she's not the only one saying things like that. So I think it's also interesting and important to take that into account. Thank you, Kamfa.
Thank you, Priya. And yes, absolutely. We would like to know more about these experiences, Kamfa, and we can follow up on this during the face-to-face session and also in the forum. Would you like to add something to this, Michele?
No, I think the response was very comprehensive, and I would agree that it's. I mean, obviously, that's the experience that Kamfa had, and it's, I think, encouraging to see that there are men that are really championing, and we see that a lot. I'm not sure that we can generalize that, unfortunately, yet, and I don't think that we should generalize also the idea that women are less likely to embrace gender mainstreaming in the workplace. I think Priya's insight in that respect is very helpful. It's just very difficult to generalize and to establish a clear and univocal trends in when it comes to these conversations.
Of course, Michele, thank you for that. So we're not having more questions from the audience right now. What I would like to take the opportunity to make one question of my own, if I may, because as you know, in this training course, we have participants from the UN system, gender focal points. We also have people that's working in gender and not necessarily being gender focal point, and some others that are not directly working on gender, but very interested in advancing gender equality. And we also have participants from private sector and other organizations. So my question would be, like, taking into account the experience of the UNSWAP, what would we be able to, let's say, point key learnings or takeaways from the UNSWAP for other organizations? Would you say, well, given the progression of the indicators, as Priya said, this can be seen as a successful experience. So what can other organizations learn from the experience of the UNSWAP? And would you like, well, any of you who would like to address this question first?
Okay, I will go first, if I can, Michele, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
I would say well, I have to say first that I am relatively new to the UNSWAP, meaning as Leticia said in my bio note, I am now collaborating with the UN Women UN Coordination Division for a year more or less, or 9 months. And I can report from the outside some of the characteristics that have made the UNSWAP so successful. One of the things is that is an accountability mechanism, and that is very important. I think one of the lessons in general on gender equality for many years now and at different levels and in different organizations is that monitoring what's happening is very important. Having a public accountability system where people are able to check what's happening and measure and keeping track of progress, that makes a huge difference. So gender equality requires a bit of this sort of scientific approach of measuring and keeping track and rethinking once and again how to make it better, because there is like gender inequality and patriarchy and discrimination is in everybody's minds, including in my mind, including in women's and men's minds. So it's very easy to accommodate and stop making progress even if you think you are doing things right. So gender equality requires a constant rethinking. So the UNSWAP is a good platform for that. So that is one element of success that I could mention, that I think it can be scaled up or replicated anywhere else. The second one that is more intangible is the network. What I found in this UNSWAP exercise and UNSWAP system framework is that it is implemented across the system. I think the network is now over 400 people, which is a lot. So there are many people involved in somehow in implementing the UNSWAP or on reporting against the UNSWAP indicators. As I said before, there are these business owners, people working on a particular area of or function, being that evaluation, capacity building, strategic planning, resources, financial resources, whatever. And they have taken ownership of this particular indicator in the UNSWAP. They have provided their own guidance. They have contributed to the new standards or the more demanding requirements in the UNSWAP 2.0 in many cases. They are keeping track of what are the obstacles for implementing and achieving, meeting or exceeding the requirements. They provide support. So this is very important because that means that gender equality has to be done by everybody. It's impossible for UN Women to be the only one entity implementing gender equality. We really need gender mainstreaming, and we really need everybody to take ownership and participate and take responsibility. So that's the other thing. And then the third element that I think is important is that the UNSWAP is very, very well imbricated, placed and set up within the UN system. It's very responsive to a CEV endorsement and to a CEV policy. It is implemented by the whole system. It has a very good and clear reporting mechanism through the Secretary General report on gender mainstreaming in the UN system to the ECOSOC. And that makes it really very well set up in a way that that touches upon all the levels of the UN system. So it fits with all the requirements for anything in the UN system to be really implemented, because it has the right endorsement and the right placing within the structures, systems, and culture of the UN. So I think that is also very important, that gender equality cannot happen as a parallel road or as a subsystem. It has to be really mainstreamed in the sense of belonging to the mainstream, being really placed in the center of any institutional culture and regulations.
That's great, Priya. Thank you so much for your reply and the key takeaways that you said. Michele, would you like to add some others? Or
Just very briefly, I mean, I think Priya said it all, but just very briefly, I think it's a very interesting question that you're asking, and the reality is that if you look at the performance areas that the UN system uses to to monitor its progress on gender equality, these can apply, of course, with adaptations on the actual means of verifications, the evidence that you need to be looking at. But those are issues that are common to almost every organization. If you look at planning, at leadership issues, at partnership issues, every organization has partners, every organization has leadership issues, every organization has organizational culture. So the concept of using scorecards is a concept that can be certainly applied to across organizations, not necessarily within the UN system. And in fact, a couple of years ago, we had there have been a couple of attempts to kind of in kind of pilot fashion. A couple of years ago, we have been communicating and exchange experiences with the SWAP, the UNSWAP, the UN Regional Commission for in the Middle East, based in Beirut, because they were precisely interested in looking into the possibility of adapting the SWAP as a methodology, of course with the focus on gender equality, to public institutions, ministries, public organizations, etc., etc. So there has been some work that was done a couple of years ago. Similarly, there is now some parts of the UN system, together with their key international and national counterparts, are also experimenting and exploring the possibility of developing scorecards in specific substantive areas of sustainable development. We are doing some work to see whether we can actually develop and pilot a gender scorecard in the water sector, for example, so that there can be a number of key minimum agreed upon performance requirements when the UN system and other partners work in the water sectors, and what does it mean for the rights of women and girls and equality between men and women. So definitely an area that in the future can be further looked at and developed.
Thank you so much, Michele. That's very interesting. I'll make sure to follow up on that SWAP initiative. And well, I'm afraid that now we have run out of time for more questions. I would like to thank you both, Priya and Michele, for being here with us today, and also to our participants for joining live in this first live session. I would also like to remind you that we'll have available this presentation as a recording, in your e-learning campus space. And well, other than that, thank you again, Michele and Priya.
Thank you, Leticia, very much, and good luck for the rest of the course.
Actually, I also wanted to remind participants that we will have the pleasure to have Michele further on in our training in another online session, although we will be sharing his screen and webcam during our face-to-face week. So thank you for that as well, Michele, and see you very soon. And thank you, Priya.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.